Hi everyone, my name is Aleix Ramon and I'm a music composer specialized in pixel art games. And you might think, oh, okay, this guy makes the typical blip-blop kind of chiptune stuff. Well, yes, but no. What I do is what I call hybrid 8-bit music. And I'm so excited to be here talking about this today. This is what I'm going to cover in this talk. What is hybrid 8-bit music? Why you should use it? How to produce it, and a few tips on how to mix it. So hybrid 8-bit music is when you blend the simple sound waves characteristic of 8-bit music with any other kind of music. And yes, you could also blend 16-bit sounds or other kind of retro sounds, but I find that you get the most interesting effect when you use the super simple sound waves of 8-bit music. So let's see an example. This is a score I made for SPACR. Let's see, this is the main theme of SPACR. Some people call this a 9-bit music instead of hybrid 8-bit. 9-bit is a term coined by the composer Hulk. And some other people would call this digital fusion or would call it a subgenre of digital fusion, which digital fusion just means that it's like a broad term that was coined by A.B. Tran. It's music that combines elements from various genres and computer music, like video game music, and features parts of the music programmed via computer software. But hybrid 8-bit is a more specific definition, and it refers specifically to combining the simple sound waves of 8-bit music with any other kind of sound. Now, I personally stumbled upon this hybrid 8-bit idea a few years ago in a global game jam in Prague in the Czech Republic. So I was teaming up with two artists, two pixel art artists and one programmer. And of course, having two pixel art artists in the team, we did, of course, a pixel art game. And I was making chiptunes music for it, purely 8-bit music. But I wasn't really happy with how my drums were sounding, how with the 8-bit drums samples I was using, I didn't really like them. So I was trying other samples. And then by accident, or maybe because of not sleeping for 40 hours straight, because it's a global game jam, I clicked on the wrong place, and instead of loading another set of 8-bit drums, I loaded Addictive Drums, which is a VST of acoustic drums, very realistic sounding drums that I used to use in the past when I made metal demos for my bands as a teenager. It loaded, and at that moment I said, hey, wait a moment, what if I tried this? So I made this acoustic drum. And then on top of it, I put the 8-bit drums that I had already done, that I didn't really like. But together they had something magic, something special, this retro feel that fit well with the game we were making, but this added expressivity of the real sounding drums. I loved it so much that from that moment, that idea stayed in my head, and I decided that I would like to eventually explore it deeper. But something else happened on that weekend. On the same global game jam, I met Jaroslav Melon, a solo developer who would later give me the perfect opportunity to experiment with hybrid 8-bit, because he started making the pixel art game SPACR, and he asked me to make music for it. Now, I know what you might be thinking. That's all nice, but why would I want to use hybrid 8-bit in my soundtracks? Well, I have a better question for you. Do you know what's the single thing that can make or break your soundtrack? The answer is congruence. Congruence is when both music and game have emotions and meanings in common. And the more congruence there is, the better they fit together. Let's say we have an action scene. You have a fight in the game, so you want the music to mean fight, to feel like fight, and to say, hey, this is fighting music. You have the fast tempo, probably minor scales, maybe something epic, maybe something that means bravery or heroism. That connects well with the action scene, right? If you have a sad scene on the game, something sad's happening, well, you want the music to say sadness. You want the music to be like maybe slower pace, a bit dissonant. That fits well with the sad scene. That's because it's congruent with it, so it has something to connect with. So following this theory, you can explain why 8-bit chiptunes music fits well with pixel art games, because 8-bit music, chiptunes music, is screaming retro. Even if I show my grandma 8-bit music, she's never played any video game, I think, she will say, yeah, this is some old school, old video game music. Everyone has that connection in their minds. This is old music. So this retro feel, which is very present in the music, is clearly present in the pixel art aesthetic, right? So that makes it that clearly pixel art games and 8-bit chiptunes music fit very well. Now, the problem is that chiptunes music, generally speaking, is quite limited in its flexibility and in its expressivity, especially 8-bit, because it's very simple sound waves, it's very limited array of sounds. You know how it is. It is like it is, and it's very specific. On the other hand, all other possible kind of music that you could use for a soundtrack, yes, they have infinite amount of possibilities of expressivity, but they are missing the retro element that would make it fit so well with pixel art games. We have the retro game, retro flavor that fits so well, but it's very limited, and we have everything else, which is infinitely expressive, but it doesn't have the retro element that would fit so well with the pixel art game. We're talking about pixel art games specifically here, maybe low poly games too. And so what do we do? Well, you guessed it, hybrid 8-bit music. And that's when you add a touch. You take a bit of this retro sounding music and you add it on whichever music you're making, and like magic, your soundtrack will fit much better into a pixel art game. And with that in mind, I want to share with you some of the secrets and techniques I discovered while experimenting with this, so that if you want to do this, you don't have to fall in the same problems and pitfalls I fell into. So first, I want to tell you which software you could use. This will be brief, but this will be especially useful if you are totally new to the chiptunes thing. But don't worry, because it's 8-bit. And the point of 8-bit is that it's simple, and it's super easy to use. This is like the simplest synthesizer stuff that you could ever use, literally. Thing to keep in mind is that you don't need to use these obscure chiptunes trackers that you might have seen somewhere. You don't need to use any old school technique to create old school sounds. You have a lot of VST plugins that are super easy to use in any DAW. You can use that very quickly to use. You don't have to worry about learning any new weird obscure tracker software. So with that in mind, let's see a few of the tools I use. So the main tool I use is Minibit by AudioThing. It's very easy to use, and it costs something like $10 if I'm not wrong. It's very simple, has some basic controls and a couple of sound effects, which I never use. And if you don't like to pay for things, you also have free alternatives like Peach or Toad or many others. I also use 8-bit drums, and I use this 8-bit drums VST, which I used to blend it with the acoustic drums like I did in this game jam the first time I tried all this. This one is also free if I'm not wrong. And there are many other VSTs out there, many of them free, that you can use to recreate the chiptunes 8-bit sounds, but just keep it simple. Actually, the only thing you really need is a synthesizer that can create some of the simple sound waves, and perhaps a few 8-bit drum samples if you want to make percussion with it. So now that we have the sound covered, I want to share with you some of the best ways to use the 8-bit elements on your music, some of the most effective ways I found while experimenting with this. So the first way, the most obvious one, is by using the 8-bit and 8-bit synth as a lead melody. Let's see an example here from a track I made for SPACR. Here I'm using a pulse wave. And it's harmonized with an octave and a third, which works well in adding richness to the sound while still sounding clearly 8-bit. Now, besides as a melody on its own, simple sound waves work very well while doubling other instruments' melodic line. Like in this case, both 8-bit and electric guitars play the same melody. And well, this is my soft spot. The teenager gamer metalhead inside me jumps of excitement every time I blend these 8-bit sounds with electric guitars. Now let's see another example. In this case, the lead melody is in 8-bit and is later joined by a banjo counter melody, and they both get together in the last bars. You can also use an 8-bit synth as a pad, in the same way that you would use, synthesizer, normal synthesizer or some string part. And you can even, in this case, you can even play with the automation to do some fade-ins and outs, to play with the dynamics as you would with an orchestral part. Let's see an example from this same track. Let's see another example. Here I use them to create a kind of lo-fi sci-fi horns, and I blended it with quite some delay and reverb. Now, one of my favorite ways to mix 8-bit sounds with other sounds is to blend it with my drums, as I did in the Global Game Jam. I like to add the 8-bit layer only on top of the kick and the drums, but you could also do it on the cymbals or the toms. So if you're using a VST drums, this is super easy. You only have to duplicate the kick and the snare of your drums, and basically that's it. Like you just layer it on top of the drums. In this case, I'm copying the whole drum MIDI part into the snare track and deleting everything else but the snare, and putting the snare notes into the right note. And same with the kick. It's also interesting to play only the 8-bit drums first and then add the acoustic drums later. It creates a kind of nice uplifting contrast. Another way I love to use 8-bit sounds in my tracks is to double the bass. I do this by keeping the original bass, perhaps taking out some of its higher frequencies to make space for the 8-bit layer. And on top of this, I add a pulse sound wave playing exactly the same notes. And I take out the lower frequencies of this pulse sound wave, not to overload the lower frequencies. I think the result is great because it adds some nice high frequencies to dull sounding bass lines, making them more hearable in small speakers. And it's a much more satisfying sound than using a purely 8-bit bass sound. Now let's talk about arpeggios. Arpeggios are great when used with 8-bit sounds. It's like the nature of these simple sound waves fits really well with arpeggios. And I personally really like to use them with some stereo delay, with a stereo delay or ping pong delay that makes the arpeggio sound from one to the right, to the left, to the right, to the left. It gives a very good effect, it creates a very good effect that creates also a lot of depth in the music. Let's see an example. Let's see another example, now mixed with an orchestral track. Lastly, another way you can use the 8-bit sounds in your music is by contrasting fully 8-bit parts with fully acoustic or electroacoustic parts. Let's see an example. This is what I did for SPACR for the main title. Here we use the main theme of the game, and the main theme is in hybrid 8-bit, so it has acoustic instruments and this country style, and then also has these 8-bit layers and the drums and the bass, some arpeggios. But what I did for the main menu was to separate all these layers in groups, like to make one version of the main theme purely acoustic and one version of the main theme purely 8-bit, and then the full version of the main theme with both together. And then in F mode, I implemented it in a way that as you change between the sub-menus of the main title, of the main menu, you jump between one version and the other. So in the main screen, you get the full version. And then in the settings screen, you get the only 8-bit version. And in the load game screen, you get the only acoustic version. It creates a quite cool effect, I personally believe. So to summarize this part, I explained a few techniques that you can use to add 8-bit sounds into your music. First one is to simply use an 8-bit synth as the lead melody. Second one is to duplicate a real instrument with an 8-bit synth. Third one is to duplicate an acoustic or electronic bass with an 8-bit synth. Then you can also duplicate the drums and create these hybrid drums. And then you can also use arpeggios to add very easily add to almost any kind of music a nice retro touch. And lastly, I also recommended that it's interesting to play with contrast of fully retro and fully whatever else you have there. As the last part of this presentation, I would like to give a few tips on how to mix these sounds, because it's also very important. Like it or not, we usually have to mix the songs ourselves, composers. So it's good to know a few tips on how to deal with this kind of sounds to preserve the retro feel, but while having a high standard of music quality, of sound quality. High frequencies are what give these sound waves the 8-bit feel. But if you use them too much, especially in different sounds at the same time, it can be a bit overwhelming. Then you can use the time delay. As I said, I use it a lot in arpeggios. When things are on rhythm, they fit with everything else. That's important, so synchronized delay is very useful for this. Then you can use reverb to blend these 8-bit sounds with everything else. And if you don't want to mud up things with big reverbs, you can always use what it's called blend reverbs. It's very short reverbs. Usually you can find presets that are called like early reflections. And this will make things blend together without adding any sense of space that you would have with the typical big reverbs. You can also use compressors on your master bus on the whole song. You can add a compressor to make things interact with each other in a subtle way. You can also use a tape emulator. If you have any tape emulator plugin, that's great to make everything fit together, things interact with each other, and that included the 8-bit synths. That helps a lot in making them fit well. And lastly, and this is good news, 8-bit sounds barely have any dynamics, which is great for mixing because it's super easy. You barely have to worry about compressors or anything else unless you're really tweaking the sound a lot, which you shouldn't, because you should keep the sounds simple, otherwise you lose a bit of the magic. So that's everything I have to say for now about hybrid 8-bit music. The best part of this is that since music affects us on such an emotional level, this kind of music, when applied to pixel art games, not only fits well, but it makes the whole game feel more retro. It makes the whole game feel more pixel art. It really connects with the nostalgic element that makes us love these games so much. And this is why I'm surprised when I don't see many composers doing this kind of hybrid, because they usually either go fully into the chiptunes way and they're missing the flexibility of other types of music, or they go the fully anything else way without touching at all any of the chiptunes, 8-bit, 16-bit, whatever sounds, missing on these retro feel connections that make the pixel art games pixel art games. But if you do, if you ever use these tips, techniques, or if you're already using it, please let me know. I would love to hear what you're doing, and I would love to learn from you too. So please send me an email at contact@aleshramon.com if you use any of this. And if you don't, it's also cool that you write me, because if you've made it this far into the talk, you're definitely my kind of person. I would like to hear from you too. And one last thing, just to make it easy for you to remember all this, I put together a PDF summary of this, everything I shared in this talk, so that you can implement it, so that you can remember it and use it when you're making the soundtrack for your next pixel art game. So go to aleshramon.com/GSC, and there you can download this PDF. And again, if you do anything with it, I would love to hear it. So my name's Alesh Ramon, music composer for pixel art games. It's been a total pleasure. Thank you for listening. All right. Hi, guys. You hear me? Great. Hello, everyone. So thank you for the very nice comments. It's really nice of you guys. And I'm glad that there's like some interest in this style, because for me, actually, this talk is a bit like a way also to measure how much interest there is on this hybrid style, hybrid 8-bit style of music, how much interest other composers have on it. And it's the perfect opportunity because, you know, this event is mostly for audio people. So it was like a great excuse to, you know, to see if there's any interest. And well, if you have any questions, I see there's no questions in the Q&A, but well, I was writing in the chat already meanwhile. Oh, sorry, there was a question. I've been getting into hybrid 8-bit music lately. How do you feel about the job opportunities for this kind of music? Okay, good question. I think there are definitely, because it's a good strategy usually to focus on a specific kind of music or on a specific kind of games. There's like basic marketing. And actually, there was this discussion on Instagram the other day with Akash, which all of you know, I guess, about this, if it's better to specialize. Yeah, it's good to specialize most of the times. And specializing in pixel art games is a way to specialize. And this kind of music fits most of pixel art games, if not all. So, and I think it's quite original. It's quite, you could say it's, I don't know if to say trendy, because soundtracks like Iconfell or Celeste use this in certain ways, and they were really people of the soundtracks. So it works. There's definitely possibilities. There's no reason to think that it's limiting you in any way to try the style. Okay. From Max, do you have any music like this that released yet? I love to check out more of it. Also curious, what your inspirations were for this? No, I don't actually have much music like this released, honestly, and I'm working on it. I mean, there's this SPACR now called FixFox. They changed the name. I made a lot of music for it. We had like I think more than an hour of music. I really made a lot of music for it, and that was the game where I experimented a lot with it, and I developed a lot this kind of style. But the game isn't released yet, so it's not public yet. So I'm kind of waiting for the game to be released. Meanwhile, I'm putting some things in Twitter, Instagram, experimenting with this, explaining how I do it, and I'm making more tracks that I will maybe even make an album of covers in this style. I would love to do something like that. So yeah, Max, maybe I'll put something out there. And the inspirations, that's a good question. Actually, Avitron has a lot of cool stuff. There's a whole digital fusion community
There's a big communities. They have a Discord community too, where there's a lot of people doing things like this, even though it's not exactly 8-bit, like hybrid 8-bit. They do a lot of other retro-ish sounds mixed with modern techniques, but it's not really 8-bit. And I prefer the 8-bit because it's really this contrast between really retro and modern. Inspirations, I don't really know actually. Like I was very at all the retro soundtracks, and I just love to mix styles. Like really like to make this weird blends of styles, like this Igor band that makes weird shit, and I always like the pixel art. So for me, it just felt natural to start blending things together. Let me see what else we have here. What scenes do you find yourself using the most for this kind of music? Well, I use mini-bit. In the video I mentioned, I use mini-bit a lot, but actually practically any synth that produces simple sound waves, like, square wave, pulse waves, sawtooth waves, any of this works actually. And besides that, I use some 8-bit sounding drum samples. So I use mini-bit, but there's many others that you can use. There was in the chat, we were talking about clock, if I'm not wrong. And there's really a lot. This is a super audio card synth, if I'm not wrong, that's the name. There's a one that people like a lot. Okay, oh, we're running out of time. Okay, I'll be, guys, by the way, I'll be in the Allspace BR room A. We can talk there much more, if any of you want. I'll be after this immediately there. Beat crushing on real instruments, Michael. Yeah, that's I use it for snare sometimes a bit, drum snare. I don't use it much more actually, but in drum snare it kind of works well to give it a touch of extra retroness. But I don't really use it much more actually. Some people do, some people hate it. What other styles do you blend together other than hybrid 8-bit? Well, I have a lot actually. I love metal as a teenager, but from there I evolved to many genres, from any world folk music you can imagine to jazz to pop to electronic, and sometimes I made some weird stuff, sometimes for game jams, and did blending everything, literally everything I could in 2 minutes of music. So really like many things. I worked before in a bit in commercials, so they asked me for many different types of music before, so I got used to dealing with all kinds of music. So we have, okay, we ran out of time apparently. But thanks a lot, guys. I'll see you if you want in the, I'll be in the Outspace BR room A. I'll be down there. And again, you can write me here in the Whova or in Instagram, Twitter, wherever, write me an email. I'm open to all of you. I love all of you. If you have watched this far, fucking love you. Sorry, really like you. You're my type of people. So guys, see you around. See you. And thanks for watching.